Hey everyone, Kathryn here. I'm very excited today. I have a recorded guest lecture for you on online sample. And those of you who do survey research, at some point you have probably ordered sample from an online panel provider. And if you've been doing this for a while, you've probably already found out, hopefully not the hard way, that the quality of online panel providers really does vary a lot. It's a you get what you pay for kind of thing. And for those of you who might be newer to survey research, it is a known challenge where there are a lot of places that we can go to as research professionals to acquire sample, to find qualified participants to take our surveys, right? There are a lot of companies out there that try to sell us sample for online research. And we really do, as professional researchers, have to be very careful about who we're getting this sample from, because we want the participants to be authentic, right? We don't want to have to worry about whether or not the people who are taking our surveys actually represent our target market or our population of interest. So online panel quality is a known challenge, and it's gotten a little bit more complex in the last couple of years because, frankly, well, we're going to talk about it in the guest lecture, but technology has changed a lot. And so with some of these changes in technology, it's actually created some challenges, but it may also be creating some new opportunities for us as well in terms of being able to use technology to better determine and assess the authenticity of our research participants. So, so that's what I talked about with this expert. And so I just, as a sort of a brief introduction, Andrew has been in the survey research business for a really long time, like me, and he's held a number of leadership positions, specifically within the online panel profession, that part of our industry. So he's been on the inside. He's worked on the inside of leading online panel companies. Right now, he's really involved in using technology to try to improve and authenticate research participants. You know, he's not giving a sales pitch for his company, just so you know. We really did have a very nice, candid conversation. So please enjoy this guest lecture with very special guest, Andrew Moffatt. And at the end, I'll share his contact information. He does welcome questions and comments from Research Rockstar students. So hope you enjoy it. Thanks, everyone. Hey, Andrew, thanks for joining me today. I know you and I've been talking about this topic for a while now, sort of curing the ills of online sampling, which is obviously a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. I've personally been doing survey research for over 30 years myself, so I've seen a lot of changes. You know, I saw the birth of online sampling, right?
Yep, I was there myself for it.
Yeah, things have changed from the days when we were exclusively relying on paper surveys or telephone data collection. So I was really happy to have you be able to join us, because I know you've got a great deal of expertise in this area. And so I was wondering if you could, first of all, sort of introduce the topic a little bit to our audience about, you know, when we talk about quality and online sample, you know, how did we, you know, can you just like briefly give us an introduction, like how did we get to this current place where there is some fair amount of widespread concern or questioning about the quality of online sample?
Yeah, really, and the questions have changed over the years. Like when online first started out, it was really questions about representation and representativeness and if it's fit for purpose for the study that you're trying to do. And today's conversation, it feels, is very much just around sample quality and getting reliable insights from the data that you're collecting. And for me, I think part of it goes to how online started. So online started very much with double opt-in panels at the forefront of how all research was done online, right? And I spent many years at SSI, which was one of the leaders in online research, and I spent some time in different parts of the world seeing online start in not just the States, but across Europe and parts of Asia, and how you deal with kind of like population challenges and different things. And over the years, to get access to new markets and new countries or new audiences, because not everyone wanted to join online panels, people created technology to expand those sources beyond panels into mobile channels, into social gaming, into real-time kind of traffic from any websites, and create kind of a broader access to people online. Kind of similar to what happened kind of in advertising and what you see there. And as that happened, over time, there's been a lot of investment into the kind of data collection side of the industry, a lot of investment into automating that supply as much as possible and creating optimization within that supply process. And I would say that what's happening is, at a broader scale, you have a smaller and smaller percentage of the overall available universe of survey participants being double opt-in panels, and that's declining year over year, and that's causing more and more of the issues that we see in the marketplace happen.
So when somebody does an online survey and they might be discarding a certain percentage of records because they feel like the records aren't quality respondents, you're saying that part of that, the cause behind that, is because of how those participants are now being recruited.
Correct. Correct. It's probably, to me, the main thing as to why all of this is happening, because ultimately what you've gone from is a double opt-in environment where you have some level of validation or control, where you're validating email address and going to someone's inbox, where you often have address verification, especially in the States, of every individual that goes into those panels, to kind of anyone within the internet available that wants to take a survey, whether it's to earn points on Farmville or to earn a in-game currency on a mobile app or something like that. And they're coming into the environment in a very different mindset than the people that are joining panels to begin with, right?
Right.
And those same channels also have a lot more fraud within them that over time has gone more and more unchecked, because as the world of fraud has evolved, the world of catching fraud within online research hasn't evolved that much. And so,
well, let me ask you a question. Let me just,
I
just want to interrupt you because I just want to clarify something. So, I do understand that there are some interesting ways that panel companies, sample providers have started to recruit more participants, especially from hard to find demographic groups like young men, right? Who are always a very challenging group to get. And
any methodology.
Yeah, and any methodology for anything, right? And so, I appreciate this, that they, that some of the companies are doing different things to try to recruit some of those populations. Like you mentioned, like gaming, right? So like tying it into, a mobile app, tying it to something else where they're bringing people in. But when they do recruit people through those alternate means, isn't there a step at which those people are saying, yes, I want to join the panel, and here's my basic demographics?
For the people that are just being recruited on the fly, likely not. Like you'll get asked maybe date of birth and some other things so that you can, kind of triangulate that person if they come back again, so you can read their cookie or read their profile again and try to create a panel-like environment for your real-time respondents. But ultimately, there is no real-time verification that happens in any way. You're not doing email address verification or verification of anything along their path to taking your survey.
Okay, so then when I'm using an online panel provider these days, some of the recruit is literally happening in real time. It's not just that they recruited, their ongoing recruiting to their panel is just ongoing reaching through these different channels. It's literally a project gets initiated, and that might drive recruiting to certain social sites that might be associated with a desirable screening criteria.
Correct. And it's not necessarily all panels all the time, right? Just to be clear, like there are some panels that do operate solely in a double opt-in type environment. They are much fewer than they used to be. And then most panel companies I call them more so supply companies, because they have some of their own supply that they own and manage and incentivize and recruit themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then usually around that asset, you're building in programmatic supply through API or some other kind of just more automated channels, so that you can pull in more young males or more audiences to fulfill the demand that you have within your company. That's
Right. And there's
what
always
they're trying
been,
to do.
and there's also always churn, right? Like I remember even years ago when I ran a panel, a specialty panel for the IT industry, yeah, we would lose like 30% a year. So there was constant work to try to fill in those really hard to find people.
Right. And for panels, that changes for each panel too. It depends on the type of model they have with that panel list, and what in like some of the larger panel companies have multiple panel brands, right? Where they'll engage with people through different channels. So whether it's through loyalty channels and you want to offer mileage plus customers an opportunity to take surveys to earn mileage plus currency, you have that. But you have some that are basically designed just to, I call them churn and burn. Basically, it's like they can often turn themselves over twice a year, 3 times a year. And so they're like this constant stream of new people kind of coming into these panel environments, and they're quite common. And within panel companies, I think everyone operates differently. There is no like every panel company is the same. The percentage of double opt-in panel that you get within a given panel differs. Like some of their assets, as I said, might be 100% double opt-in. Some might be 5% opt-in. That's, I guess, something you can figure out for yourself when you're talking to them.
No, but I think it's a really interesting point, because, and this is probably just because I haven't been, since I'm spend a lot of my time teaching these days, I haven't had to order online panel myself in the last few years. And so I didn't realize that if I were to, that now it is something for me to consider, like, are the people that are the suppliers that I'm considering, do they have a double opt-in panel? And if not, what else do I need to know to feel good about the quality that I'm likely to get from the part of their panel that's not double opt-in?
Right. And then you have others like exchanges, which are pretty prominent now too. These are kind of champions of programmatic samples. So as many real-time companies like a Lucid or a Cint or a Pure Spectrum and people like that, who are basically amalgamating supply in an open and transparent way. Like you see a lot of, similar kind of trends within those areas. And some of those have kind of more name your price type functions within there. So you can buy cheap, but once you buy cheap, you also open yourself up to more poor quality or fraud type stuff that can make it your way into your surveys. So it's quite a complex world, the supply part of it, right? And the way we have looked at it over the years is that it's, outside of people, it is your number one line item. And if maybe sometimes
as a researcher, yes, sample, right?
And as a supply company, it is also, right? So as private equity has come in, there's been more investment. It's been one of the major, supply acquisition and how people buy participants and recruit participants for study has evolved so much because of how much money has been invested in the technology and the efficiencies that can be gained within those kinds of systems, right? So they drive a lot of margin, they drive a lot of profit, and they drive a lot of valuation for these companies. They don't necessarily have the same motivations as researchers do, right? To get to the best quality sample along the way, more just how much supply can we fit into this funnel and make it as usable as possible.
Well, you're raising a really interesting issue, which is, forever, those of us who do survey research, to some extent, the onus has always been on us as the researchers to check our data and make sure that the respondents are legit, right? I look at, are they completing what should really be an 8-minute instrument in 30 seconds? Okay, so identify those speeders, right? Identify the people whose answer options are clearly illogical, and sometimes, we'll even set traps, in a way, or red herrings,
Yep.
plant some red herrings and stuff. And so we've always had some responsibility ourselves as the researchers to check these things and to use some of these simple ways of cleaning the data before we actually do our analysis. But, as I'm hearing you talk about how different the sample is being sourced ultimately, I'm wondering if those types of steps are going to be enough. Is it going to become increasing? Is there something about what's going on that might make it harder for me to catch authenticity issues myself?
I think so. And the problem isn't getting worse. And you're right in that researchers have taken that onus and that responsibility over the years. And I think there's, we talk internally sometimes about the concept of acceptable loss, right? Like there's almost like this acceptance that you're going to kick out a certain amount of people, right? But that also equates to labor on the researcher side, and you're using your most valuable asset to clean data, right? It doesn't seem logical to me, and the problem is getting worse, right? So the more you can do on the front end to clear up your back end issues, that will save you time, will save you labor, and put those kind of hours to use on stuff that's going to drive value for your company rather than suck it up, which is what's happening now.
Right.
And I think most of what I've seen in the data collection space is pushing more and more work onto researchers as a function, right? So whether it's data cleaning, it's also labor, right? Because whether it's the use of DIY tools or pushing ways for things to happen in more automated ways, right? They're being pushed, that labor is being pushed onto researchers, or because they've taken that labor and outsourced it to lower cost markets. And now, researchers are going to have to become more fieldwork adept than what they used to before, because that same skill set's not in panel companies.
Interesting.
So we focus a lot on saving researchers labor. That's kind of like our kind of core area right now, to try to help researchers become, I think, use the assets that they already have a lot better.
Right.
And that's the people asset.
So, but in theory, then that function then could exist in a couple of different places. So is it about providing technology to the researchers themselves so that they have ways of verifying authenticity or better testing to make sure that they've got good data as opposed to how we would normally do it? Or is this about having the panel companies be able to demonstrate objectively that they're putting technology and mechanisms in place to validate or authenticate?
I would like to say both. I would like to say that most panel companies should do it, and I think a lot of them do a good job with what was available from a technology perspective. There's also issues with your own supply, right? If you've got some tech that's kicking out 10 or 20% of your supply, that has an impact on your top line and bottom line if you start to eliminate those folks from your equation, your supply equation. So there's a lot of dynamics to it. We're seeing a lot of researchers actually start to take ownership and responsibility of that problem themselves and drive that technology change, more so because most can't use just one supplier anymore anyway, because not one supplier can do everything. So you need to have something more universal that works for your own company. And,
right. But when you say not have one supplier that can do everything, so there are definitely cases, that obviously where you may work with more than one sample provider, but for several years now, a lot of the sample providers seem to have relationships with each other so that they are, you can go to one, I don't want to name names, but you go to company X, they don't have enough to meet your quota requirement for luxury car owners. And so they
right.
tap into the panel over at company Y, right?
Sure.
And then they give you a deduped, access, right?
Yeah. So that just speaks to that one supplier can't do it all, really, right? It's the same concept. It's just they do have some supplier relationships with each other. It depends on who you're buying from, whether they're open about that or transparent about that or not, right? It's really down to the individual organization that you're working with, right? And
yeah,
so
and I think, to
have some degree of control across all of your data collection, like, you're trying to make kind of universal vendor and supply decisions from the data that you have, and the more central you can keep it to your own work, the better off you're going to be.
Right. And so I think then, and correct me if I'm wrong, so then I think your point would be that in some cases, there's going to be research teams that are going to kind of want to have a primary sample provider that's got a lot of relationships, so that they've got that flexibility. They've got that one place that they can go to, and they know that if they can't meet their difficult quota requirements or whatever, that partner is going to have plenty of other options to fill in.
Yeah, it depends on who you are as an organization, honestly. You know, so we see some that want to buy cheap. We see some that want to just have someone do everything. We have some, like you're talking about, which are hybrid, which are like, we want to do it, but we don't know how to do everything, and we need some help. And, you know, those ultimately become more in-source or outsource folks over time, right? So I kind of look at. Yeah, go ahead.
But we're talking about panel here, right? So when you say in-source versus outsource, are you talking about still the panel part, or are you talking about survey research more broadly?
No, panel and data collection and field work as a function, basically.
All right. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I understood. So then when you're saying like keep it inside or outsource it, you're just referring to the idea of, as a researcher, say if I'm a researcher at a brand, that I may want to have that one-stop shopping partner, or I might want to take on more of that data collection management. I'm going to have a number of partners that I've vetted, and I'm going to assemble the right one or more option per project, as opposed to have it just like one go-to provider.
Exactly.
Got it.
And that's usually organizationally, however, like every organization set up differently, and some change, right? But you tend to follow whichever path they're giving you. You're right. So it's like, if they're really looking to insource over time, you know, you kind of work with them to build their knowledge and what they're doing, and try to help them understand how to improve, right? And also give them technology to do that. Whereas someone who just wants a hands-free approach, you just say, all right, guys, like just take care of it all. And in those cases, your supplier, your company, or whoever it is, will do all of your kind of acquiring from other sources from you. But in either way, you have multiple panels usually doing one job, right? And so as a researcher,
behind the scenes,
you know, it's like it's just right now, I think more than ever, because we've seen fraud prop up through COVID even more, because what's happened is more people are buying cheaper within these exchanges. That's leading to more fraud coming into the ecosystem. And there's been just a spike in fraud that we've seen, fraud that we've caught, and most suppliers that I talk to within the industry speak to fraud coming up in channels that it didn't traditionally come up in. So loyalty channels and other places that were never sources of fraud previously.
Can you help me understand that one? That's a really interesting example. Can you help me understand more? When you say loyalty channels, do you mean recruiting participants from loyalty card programs?
Correct. Like think of the Mileage Plus example, right? So they've got a loyalty program in place. There's some panels that will work directly with that loyalty program, do some marketing to join panels and bring them into a panel environment where they'll take surveys. So they're more closed environments, but there's more fraud making their way into those closed environments as well than ever before.
I wouldn't have guessed that. That is so interesting. So people are fraudulently joining mileage programs. They don't, or what are they doing? They signing up for like 5 mileage accounts? And I mean, why would you even do that?
Yeah, because you can get lots of different offers from these places to get miles that you can convert into other things, you know, so it just happens. It's crazy.
Oh my goodness. I wouldn't have thought about that.
That is really
interesting.
You can sell miles out in the open market as well, right? So if you are in, you know, India or China, and that, you know, goes a long way, even if it's smaller money.
No, and it adds up. I can imagine that, you know, with volume, that kind of fraud could really add up. I would never, that never would have occurred to me. That is really interesting.
Yeah.
So what would you say then is the most common source of fraud these days?
I think it's really source driven. And the more, like, I'll give you one example of how we used to operate before we put some technology in place, which is we blended just double opt-in panels across every source and only limited the supply that we bought to double opt-in panel from everywhere, because what we felt was that would give you the most likelihood of having consistency, least likelihood of having kind of fraud or bots within your environment. It doesn't make you kind of like, it doesn't make you immune from having issues, but certainly helps. And I think the more real time that happens within whatever channel you're buying from will lead to a higher propensity for fraud issues to happen within your survey. And once it gets into your survey environment, then it can cause havoc beyond that individual survey, right? So it's not just a one-time thing, it could be an ongoing thing. And so I think it's important to understand what you're buying and who you're buying it from and where those channels are coming from as a buyer before you do buy.
So then what would you say to somebody, especially somebody who might be newer to survey research? You know, if you could only give them like one tip for what they can do to help mitigate some of that risk.
Yeah, so it would be to, like, if I had my way, I would buy probably double opt-in only, unless there's some technology in place that prevents that fraudulent and bot type traffic or survey farm type traffic from making it into your surveys. That's basically what I would do, because that's how I operated myself. And you know, I was part of the evolution in a lot of markets to see the impact of, you know, real time versus panel in data across sources and seeing when data issues came up. And I used to work with the largest research and consulting firms in the world when we did this. And so it really is driven from kind of global online experience and seeing issues crop up over years in many markets and many types of studies. And you see it in more difficult studies than you see it in easier studies, is the best way to put it. So your lower incidence, harder to reach populations, your B2B audiences or healthcare stuff that have higher incentives, you see the most issues.
Interesting. Yeah, well, it makes sense. And like you said, especially like B2B, where there do tend to be very high incentives that are offered.
Yeah, yeah.
So
we have other ways to solve for B2B, but that's a different day.
All right, all right. Well, thank you, Andrew. This has really been fascinating, and I really appreciate you sharing your expertise. I guess just in closing, you know, you've talked a couple of times about how, you know, there may be technology solutions to help fix some of these problems. So why don't we just close with, hopefully on a positive note, you know, how is this stuff going to get improved over time? You know, how do we use technology to make this a fixable problem?
Yeah. So I think, look, people have recognized it's a problem. I think that's the first great thing that's happened, right? So for many years, people just ignored it and talked about it. And everyone was like, this is kind of like a pipe dream. No one's really going to do anything about it. But what's happened really over the past, I'd say 12 months or so, is just an explosion of new ways to think about tackling fraud within the industry. So whether it's, you know, AI or machine learning type learning behaviors that exist within exchanges. So a lot of them have, like, trying to look at the behavior of an individual over time and how likely this person's a good actor versus bad actors, right? And putting some learning that's beyond kind of just humans into place so that, you know, that can become better and more evolved over time. So you see some of those exist within exchanges. You see other fraud tools and some blockchain solutions coming out that really are trying to tackle the same issue, which is kind of like fraud and bots. I think the blockchain is really just about validation, as well as probably giving the research participant a little bit more value in the process, which I think is also a good thing. And then, like, for us, we're in this space ourselves. I think we're really focused on powering the user and giving the user as much data as possible so that they can understand what types of fraud they're seeing and where it's coming from, and appending that to survey data and coupling it with your back-end data so that you can start to create your own fraud profile as an individual research organization over time.
That's really interesting. I can imagine cases where that probably would vary quite a bit by what their populations are that they're doing research with, right?
Right, and we're seeing different trends within types of research. So consumer research fraud is different from B2B research fraud, and seeing different things. And so we're still evolving how we're looking at it ourselves, but what we have is the data that tells us, hey, this person's device is set up to be kind of suspect, like they're trying not to be caught, right? So we've actually got some markers within some of the tech that we've built that identify survey farm participants. And I'll shock you a little bit before we go, which in saying that every test that we did so far with any panel company, research organization, or someone that's kind of just testing our tech, there's been survey farm participants in every single study.
And for people who may not know what a survey farm is, can you give us a brief definition?
I would say coordinated survey activity that's designed to falsify results in studies, or just basically set up to make incentives or to game kind of panel systems.
And we typically see these from specific geographies, right? I mean,
we do, but like we found a couple in the US this year. So
oh, really?
Yeah, with thousands of IP addresses, hundreds of email accounts, coordinated survey activities across all of these, across many panel companies, and they exist everywhere, not just in Venezuela and China where we think that they are. There's money to be made, and you know, and the truth is, the old technology allowed that to happen because it never evolved faster than the fraudsters did. And they know how to game the system. They know how to get through it. And as soon as you catch them, they'll go back and find some other ways to do it. So it's an ongoing game of cat and mouse, but well,
it's going to keep you busy.
It'll keep us busy. And I think, you know, if you're using any panel company or if you have your own tech that you're licensing, I think it's more just understanding how updated that is and how it evolves, because fraud evolves fast. And but I think there's a future in sight where, you know, my goal is to be able to fuel automation better by having better outputs from day one, right? From without having your researcher having to go in and spend time doing it. That just basically can fuel research organizations to get a lot faster and a lot more nimble in what products they can put out into the marketplace. So if we can make that happen, I'll be happy.
Excellent. And for the insights teams at a brand, also for them to be able to execute their projects with more confidence.
I think more and more automated research is happening in those spaces, right? So like if you're tying that to someone who's buying cheap within an exchange and there's 30% fraud within that channel, then like your product's no good. You're making the wrong decisions, right? So you just have to, as good as some of the automation technology is, it's got to be connected to supply or filters within that supply that allow you to make it more usable.
Awesome. Andrew, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciated getting to chat with you, and I know that we could chat on a bunch of related topics, so maybe we'll get to do this again soon.
That sounds great, and thank you for having me.
All right, take care.
Okay, thanks, Kathryn.
Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that guest lecture. I really enjoyed talking with Andrew. I thought he was very candid about what some of the challenges are, but also talking about what some of the potential solutions are. So thank you, Andrew. You're wonderful, and I hope I get to have another conversation with you soon. And I also want to point out that Andrew does welcome questions and feedback from Research Rockstar students. So he's given me permission to share his email address. And of course, he's also on LinkedIn. So if you have any feedback or questions for Andrew, please do reach out to him or reach out to me. Thanks, everyone.